Now, Ivana Stradner is a research fellow with the Russia program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. She joins us from Washington, D.C. A welcome to DW. Is any of today's European diplomatic activity in Brussels and in Paris likely to have any effect on tomorrow's talks in Moscow?
As we just heard on your show, nothing about Europe without Europe. So I think that's the approach that we need to have, because the most important thing that we have to understand right now is that Putin is trying to put a ball in Ukraine's court and to ask maximalist demands. And unfortunately, Mr. Witkoff has been falling for this typical old KGB game for a very long time. So I have no doubt that tomorrow Russia will reject the initial plan to ask again maximalist demands, to put back, the paper back in Washington, D.C. to be discussed for two reasons. Number one, to portray Ukraine as an unreliable ally. And number two, to buy more time because Putin does not want to end this war anytime soon. Okay. So that's precisely what we have to understand how Putin thinks these days.
But let's not get into the land of wishful thinking. You say nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Witkoff goes to Moscow tomorrow and comes back, as you suspect, with a list of Russian demands. My question to you was, has anything that has happened today in Brussels and Paris, is anything likely to have any effect on tomorrow's talks in Paris and it's in Moscow? And it sounds like you think the answer to that question is no.
So, Putin doesn't even consider Europe as a serious actor, and that's why he's trying to negotiate with the United States. And that's something that Europe should absolutely reject, because Europe should be the one, deciding about Europe's future, and Ukraine is part of Europe. What the United States has to do right now is to understand that one of the most important pillar of our gravity is our alliances. And even though Mr. Trump is in a rush to sign any deal, and I mean literally any deal, he has to understand that it's better to have no deal in the short run than to have any deal in the long run. And that's precisely why Europe discussing security guarantees, why Europe discussing the future economic development, and why Europe discussing the European and NATO path for Ukraine has to be on the table, because after all, Europe is also to put, the EU is also to put in a context like the great power, and we should not forget that.
Let me just push back against that again, because the United States doesn't have to do anything. The United States just has to do what it feels like it has to do, whether that be put a deal to Ukraine that Ukraine finds unacceptable, or puts to Ukraine the fact that you sign the deal or we walk away. The United States has to do what it feels in its best interest.
So, a couple of things. I think it's very important not to discuss what Trump says, but what he does. And I doubt that he's going to abandon Ukraine in the long run. What Trump also misunderstands about Russia
Let me just interrupt on that part and ask you why you believe that, when everything that we've seen so far tends to indicate that he's moving in that direction. Why do you believe he will not walk away from Ukraine?
I don't believe that it's in the U.S. interest to do that. And Trump is, after all, a very pragmatic leader. He understands that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are working together against also the United States. He doesn't, like Putin because he believes that Putin is a wonderful ally of the United States. What he misunderstands about negotiating with Putin is that he's trying to use his business strategy about win-win strategy, negotiation, trying to implement real estate tools and techniques, trying to change Putin's behavior. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. But let's also call a spade a spade. It was President Trump that did two really good things, and we have to give a credit where credit is due. Number one, to remove nuclear weapons threat that Russia has been banging for a very long time in front of Europe's and US eyes. And the second thing, impose sanctions, further sanctions on Russia. And I would not be surprised if further sanctions would be on the horizon, and also arming Ukraine even more after Putin rejects the peace. So I really don't think that President Trump will abandon Ukraine in the long run.
Are we any clearer on what the 28-point peace plan that Ukraine and the Europeans found so objectionable, are we any clearer what that has now morphed into?
So that 28 peace plan was absolutely unacceptable, which asked, Ukraine to abandon its territory, to give up on its NATO membership, and to limit its military. We also understand here in Washington, D.C., that Mr. Zelensky is not going to accept something like that. So as Mr. Rubio correctly emphasized, that we have to think about the future of Ukraine. We have to think about long-term peace. So I think it's too early to speculate anything, but I would absolutely not exclude the idea that the U.S. is trying, to push Ukraine. I would absolutely not support the idea that the United States is trying to push Ukraine to give up its territory, because that's not going to work.
Thanks so much for joining us, Ivana. Ivana Stradner from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Thank you.